there, I'm Nicola Osborne. I'm Programme Manager for Creative Informatics, and I am incredibly excited to be chairing this panel on the future of festivals. We have a brilliant lineup for you, so I'm going to introduce our three speakers here. We have Gabrielle Jenks, who is Digital Director at Manchester International Festival and at The Factory, which is a world-class cultural space opening up in 2021. And her background's in curating cinema, art and creative technology. We have Hugh Forrest, who is Chief Programming Officer for South by Southwest and who oversees content for the whole of the South by Southwest conference. So it's a music festival, film festival, and the educational aspects of the programme. And his background's in kind of newspapers and publications before festivals, which is it's got an interesting mix here in terms of backgrounds. Great. And then Maya Morel is a creative producer at Boomtown. She's been with Boomtown since its inception 12 years ago. And she's been there in various different roles, from performer, coordinator and production manager to her current role as creative producer. So we've got a fantastic lineup here, all doing really different things. So I wanted to start by just asking you to say a little bit about what happened this year, right? Because we all know that lots of festivals have been cancelled. All of you I know have had to change your plans in some ways. So I thought I might just start going around from Maya, just asking what you had to do differently this year. Like what how did the cancellation go? How did the pandemic affect you? What was supposed to happen? What have you done? So I'm going to start with you, Maya.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Yeah, what a year it's been, hey? So when we wind back to March, where we started getting news of this, interestingly, actually, I was just about to get on a flight to go to America to go to South by Southwest. And our story was called State of Emergency. And then California went into state of emergency, and then all of the COVID things started unfolding, and everything happened really quickly for us. You know, that whole trip was cancelled. We sent everyone home from the office, and we kept just the heads of departments in, and it was the whole thing was just upside down. You know, we all had to go home and work from home. We had to furlough pretty much everyone, keep a skeleton staff on, and then we reworked the festival hoping it would still happen in 2020, but then we started understanding it was not going to happen, and then we had to go through the very painful and unknown process of cancelling the event for the first ever time. I think that was back in May. So yeah, that was quite a hit, but we kept a small team on to continue the business and festival side of things, which we're still reacting on a daily basis to everything that's changing around us. But the main thing that it gave us was a chance to pause. We don't have that. We've not really had that in our history of the event, because we go from the event straight into planning the next year's show. So that chance to pause was really, really valuable to us, because we got to properly reflect on our values and what's important to us and what we want to be moving forward.
Brilliant. So I'm going to ask you a bit more about that later, I think, because I'm really excited to hear how you've made some shifts. But you were talking about cancelling for the first time. And I know South by Southwest, it was also the first time you'd ever cancelled in your 33 years. Do you want to say a bit more about that, Hugh, and what's kind of been happening during this very weird year?
Sure. Let me first say it's a huge honor to be here, and I think I can learn a lot more from the audience and from the other speakers than you guys can learn from me, but we'll pretend otherwise for the next few minutes. South by Southwest typically happens in March, and I like to say that South by Southwest in our better days or our best days is a place where you can come preview the future, and unfortunately that kind of held true for this year with COVID also. We were one of the first big events in the US to be canceled. We were canceled by the city of Austin. The Game Developers Conference in California had been canceled the week before, but we had been working closely with the city to see if we thought, to see if it was going to be possible to happen. We thought we could get the thing in. Certainly, in retrospect, that would have been crazy. And, there's so many experiences like Maya's where people were on a plane or at the airport when they learned of the cancellation. we've gone through a whole range of scenarios post-event. Initially, you know, in the first week after canceling, after the event was canceled, we talked about, well, can we just recreate the whole event online? We can do it. And that was probably the adrenaline of the event speaking. We eventually saner minds prevailed. We did do a very, very small amount of content online from May through late June. Some of that content were panels and presentations that had been scheduled at South by Southwest. Some were other new things we pulled in. This was free. You didn't have to had a badge, so it was something. But it, you know, certainly reinforced what I think will be a theme of this conversation, that producing something online is so much different than doing a in real life, in real world event. We certainly had some experience over the last few years producing things online, but nothing to the extent of what we were doing in May and June of 2020 and what we will do in March 2021. So echoing what Maya said, it's a huge learning experience. It is a crisis opportunity. It's a crisis, but an opportunity to grow. And if we can make it through, we'll all be a lot stronger. But there's certainly a lot of challenges ahead.
Yeah. And Gabby, you're doing something slightly different this year because you were on a kind of an off year, right? Because the Manchester International Festival runs only every 2 years. So how did this year look to you? Was it different from normal, or how did you decide to sort of play the year?
Yeah, so you're normally in the off year when we're not delivering the festival, we still have an annual program. So we had some projects that were still very much in development, but were delayed. But we, a bit like, you know, Hewitt and Maya, we went back to our DNA, I suppose. We were profoundly local in how our first response, which was about supporting the freelancers and local artists in the city, and offering micro commissions and, you know, space to talk. Actually, there was a lot of questions and anxiety that emerged quite quickly, you know, which is really normal. And we were creating a space where they could talk to us. So we had quite quickly set up like a Zoom check-in for people in the city. So as we figured stuff out, we shared that with our community, and then you know, we worked internationally. So, you know, profoundly local and profoundly international. And we started working with our international partners on really those plans for the festival and how we might keep that conversation alive. But also we set about developing some work with them, which was really about responding to this time. And that will be released next year. So, but alongside that, we had, you know, we had been delivering we had been planning a project which actually was about to launch at the same time, called Virtual Factory, which had been in the pipeline for ages. So we were quite lucky that we'd already had it. It sounds terrible. We'd already had like a program that was going to launch online. But interestingly, we sort of, it landed at a time where actually there was a lot of digital fatigue. There was a lot of noise. There was a lot of virtual exhibitions already out there. In the first 3 months, we saw so many events. So we moved actually a delay of that project to much later on. And we launched a project which in essence was it's a series of projects, online projects, which are running throughout the year. But the first one was an exhibition and performance within Fortnite Creative with a virtual artist called the Turbo Alvedon. So it was very much an experiment for us internally, but one that we had wanted to start anyway. And it just happened to land at a time where there was all this activity in Animal Crossing and all the in-game performances in Fortnite as well. So actually we had this challenge of also trying to manage how do you stand out when there's so much going on. So it was a bit of balance of trying crisis management and supporting the community, as well as thinking about how projects land in a time where there's so much noise.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting challenge for anyone who's been offering things online. an interesting challenge in terms of the futures of your festivals. I think that's there's been a lot of things available, and some of those things have been free, and some of those things have not been free. And trying to find your audience in that time is quite an interesting sort of challenge. Anyway, I did kind of want to ask actually, how are all your audiences doing, and have you had a chance to kind of reach out to them and engage with them, or kind of how have they been engaging with you this year versus normally you'd see them all, right? So I started wondering, I think Maya, you did some specific kind of focus groups and discussions to try and, as part of your going back to the DNA sort of side of things, right? Do you want to say a bit more about that work?
Yeah, so we had the break, and in that time we decided it'd be really good to connect and really dig deep into what people, what's the memorable parts of Boomtown, what do people love about it, because you think but it's good to check, isn't it? And they were really interesting. The focus groups were great. They came back with a very sort of human sort of side of Boomtown, actually. Like the participatory element was really important to everybody, and when we run our online event we tried to keep that as a sort of focus and keep the familiarity of that. And so we had a costume competition, obviously, because it's Boomtown, come as your own character, and we had a create your own Boomtown, and we'd had some fantastic like set bills and things being submitted, but relatively the audience is still really engaged with us. They, we've had barely any refunds asked for. We've had really successful ticket launch, and the Boomtown community is a really strong one, and we can feel that love. And so we're lucky, I guess, that we've still got them.
Is that audience used to connecting with each other online already? I know you're quite. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's a big online community. Obviously, part of our storytelling is online. We drop these theatrical trailers, and in the last year we were running a lot of ARG element to our story, and so we'd already released the first episode, which was going really well before all of this sort of happened. But that had its own little splinter group online, but there's also like Boomtown groups online. That it's
on the off chance that our audience isn't sure, ARG is an alternate reality game. So seen lots of stuff in this space over the last couple of days, and you'll see more, but I just wanted to make sure it's nice and clear. Gabby, how about you? How's your audience been connecting? Because you did have some cancellation stuff, I think, although it was like an off year. Have they been connecting up with you and feeding back to you?
Yeah. So we had to postpone the longer buy, actually, because that was just going to happen, which is a production we're doing with Riz Ahmed. That was just as we were entering lockdown. Our audiences have been extremely generous, one of the gifts to our audience was we did broadcast quite a lot of content during like the big hits of MIF, so people could have festivals in their own home, whether that was the New Order, a snippet of the New Order broadcast, or we actually did a small commissioning cycle, which was Festival in My Home, where you could essentially broadcast your own festival at home. So I think they've been extremely generous. I think there is a thirst for in real life experiences. We do a lot of music gigs, and we'll probably talk about this later on about how you can replicate that experience online. And I think there's a real desire and ache for a communal experience where we're all in the same space. And I think that's the MIF community, and how we think about the festival is very much the city coming alive. And so a lot of what we're doing is trying to think about how do we do that in a really safe way, but still take over the city and create these kind of mass public events. So we're trying to stay true to what our audience expect. And I think, and so they've been very generous and very receptive of things that we've tried out. And, for us, certainly like virtual factories is a really new thing for MIF. We don't do work in that space. So, that's really been we had a great response to it. So I think, very generous, very understanding, and just really hungry for sort of mass participation events moving forward.
One episode we had a chat, and the thirst for live was a strong theme. How about your audience? Obviously, you cancelled so last minute. There'll have been people who will be they won't have expected it to be coming in some of the ways that some festivals that cancelled had quite a longer lead time to be able to do that. So how have they been kind of responding and engaging with you?
Well, I think as event organizers, we all have learned and continue to learn that the more we can engage our audience year round, the stronger we are. And we had developed a lot of strategies to do this over the last decade, including meetups in different cities around the US and different cities around the world, traveling to different events. Certainly both of those are scratched. There's also the other challenge of, people want information. What are you guys doing? What's on schedule for 2021? And there's that balance of trying to get them information, but holding back until we actually really have a solid game plan. And there was, I would say, a degree of frustration with our audience, our community, that we weren't putting out information earlier on that. And I think we were frustrated internally also, but also realizing that, we got to have a pretty tightly developed plan before we go out with this. And haste makes waste. The longer we can postpone till we know exactly what we're doing, will be good. We went on sale with our virtual passes for 2021 about 3 weeks ago. The initial response on that has been very, very good, much better than what we thought. So echoing what Gabby and Maya said, I think there's tremendous support from our communities. I think there's tremendous demand for, there is demand for virtual events. There's even more tremendous demand, and will be pent up demand for real world events when we can get back to those in late 2021 or 2022.
So perfect point to leave me on then, because I wanted to ask next about what we do with the stuff that has been experimented with this year, and what the plans are looking like for the next few months and the next kind of year ahead in terms of what is possible with technology. Because as Gabby was saying before, I really want to know kind of what the experience of trying to replicate the live in some of these spaces looks like, and what some of the challenges are to doing that. So I don't know if you want to go first, given yours is coming up the soonest of these festivals in March. So how's it looking? It's virtual only, right, for 2021?
For 2021, we're still holding out a small hope that there can be some kind of small in-person component, but that's a small hope. It's not looking too likely, particularly with the current spike in cases in the US. So it will be largely online. A similar offering to what we've done in the past, with lots of conference content, panels and presentations, an online music festival, an online film festival, an online comedy festival. Certainly much less content than what we've done before, but still far too much for any one person to absorb. I think that the big thing that will be a theme for what we all talk about is trying to figure out and create as many robust networking opportunities as possible. People come to events to get information, but even more so, they come to events, conferences, festivals to have interactions with other people. I don't think we can duplicate those interactions, those real world interactions in an online forum, but we can try as hard as possible to get the next best thing. So again, trying to figure out all kinds of ways that we can facilitate those kinds of connections.
Yeah, and I know, Maya, the tickets are on sale already for next year for you guys, and is that sort of a hybrid thing next year, or is it going to be
at the moment, well, the pandemic has sort of driven us fiercely towards human connection, actually. So the plans are for a live event, because for an event like ours, I think we've got to go for it. We've got quite a robust COVID contingency budget built in for hygiene and ventilation. And I think at the moment we've, like I mentioned, the pause, we've really reflected and kind of condensed everything we've learned over the last 12 years down, and we used an analogy of pruning the tree to help it grow, because we're going to have to come back a bit and then not start again, but start from a new place. So we're pushing for the live event, and I guess we're being quite fluid in our decision making. And as the months go on, if it's looking likely that it's not, we might start looking at hybrid or other versions. Oh, hang on, something's just come on my screen.
Presumably with things like with the OGG and other kind of elements that are already there that are digital, there's some elements that will be that could be adaptable anyway if some of those contingency plans come in as well. Yeah. I
mean, we're always looking at tech because, you know, we work with a blend of live and digital theatrical interaction, and so we're always looking at that, and so I guess we're just going to have to be fluid with it and see. But at the moment the plan is for the live event and just sort of similar experience and tech that will enrich that rather than make it clunky, but we'll see.
Fingers crossed for all of these.
Yeah.
And Gav, I wanted to ask you, because I know you've been doing some experiment with Fortnite, and in terms of live and digital events, I know you had some really interesting sort of experiences with doing that. So I wonder if you say a bit more about what you've been doing and how that's feeding into the kind of plans for what you create next.
Yeah, so I think, you know, we alongside many organizations really interested in multiplayer games, and also, you know, the development of the infrastructure that sits around Fortnite in particular. So we worked with the sandbox version to relocate the factory, essentially build our own island, and in there is an exhibition. There's a performance space, and we've been doing a number of events and workshops and virtual tours. You know, and actually it was largely inspired by the rise of virtual tourism. So this idea that, you know, you will get the same kind of wow, wonder, and sense of excitement in a game than you would do in real life. And you know, so a lot of the thinking, I think I mentioned it a lot, but like Rough Guides, which was a travel guide released there, you know, Rough Guide to the Xbox, because they could see that there was this excitement of in-game experiences, and also just the tools in games are just, you know, the ability to take photographs. It all fits very much into, you know, you carving out your own journey as a player and archiving that and capturing it. So some of the tools that those games enable, which actually really empower the player, give them user-generated content, allow them to build their own journey through that, create their own journey, is some of what we're thinking about when we're thinking about the large-scale events in the festival. And I think there's also this, I think I was talking to you guys about this the other day, but I think in those environments, you very much need to play to the rules of the game. So as a curator, I was like, let's just make a really nice installation and performance space. Make it work on that level. But actually, the artist was brilliant in terms of arguing the fact that it needed to be a really hard game, so people came back. So we got repeat visitors, and yes, so a lot of our discussions were about how difficult the levels were. But they were right; they were absolutely right, because that meant people came back, and we've had repeat visitors since it launched, because of the fact that some of it's really difficult, and obviously that's understanding the culture of the game, that people would then show how to get to the end, and that's shareable, etc. So you know, we've got just a real appreciation for what those in-game experiences are doing in terms of the audiences they're reaching and the infrastructure that enables them. It sort of blows my mind slightly. So but there's a lot of, I think there's a lot we can learn from that in terms of how we build excitement around other experiences within the festival. And I think actually some of that learning you might see in Billie Eilish did a gig a month ago, and you could see the influence actually of in-game experiences on that broadcast. There was a space where fans could share information. There was fans where they could say what were their highlights, and it's really very much about empowering and allowing that kind of co-presence between attendees to be really visible in the staging of the production, so you're not just getting a passive experience.
Yeah, and you had really good response, right, in terms of the number of people who actually engaged in those kind of Fortnite experiences. It sounded like it was a really huge turnout. I wouldn't necessarily expect there to be that many people who'd be that ready for that sort of experience. It's really
Yeah, it's really interesting because, we were doing these broadcasts and, we had FK Twigs and we had Rizamid and, we were getting a couple of thousand, if not, a bit more than that. We do something in Fortnite Creative and we get 1.5 million people engaging within the first week. And we're like, this is really interesting. Like, where do you put your attention and where do you invest some of our thinking going forward? But also, I think, some of the exciting things about working within existing game spaces are the fact that, you know that there's going to be an audience potentially. So, it's working with that. And obviously, there's a culture for in-game performances, given they've done like Weezer and a number of big names. So, but yeah, so I think, the numbers are quite phenomenal. But actually gave us a lot of hope because, I think there was so much activity going on and actually some great quality work being put out, but it was getting lost, I think. And so we were like amazed by the engagement.
So I'm really interested to hear as well from others on the panel here about what those opportunities that do seem to be coming out of these new digital experiences are kind of looking like, and where there's potential, where there's potentially can't quite reach yet, where there's still kind of R&D to do to kind of get to be able to do the thing you'd love to do, but you can see the potential for at the moment, because it has certainly the accessibility of some of these events has changed financially and geographically and all of that. So yeah, I'm wondering sort of how optimistic are you feeling? What are the other opportunities that have been appearing? I don't know, Maya, maybe if you'd like to maybe let us know what you're thinking at the moment in that direction.
Yeah, in terms of R&D it's a tricky one, because for us the R&D has always been based on, I think, because what we've done is quite groundbreaking in its own way, because I don't think there is another show that does, I think it successfully delivers the story over 5 days over a giant site and online. And so our R&D to date has been focused on how our audience is engaging with it, because obviously we have a broad spectrum of an audience as well. Not everyone is there for theatre, some people are there just for music, and so it's just been really interesting to work that out. I mean, I know that we have been very successful in this blend of live and digital in engaging like a young demographic. And I think, we have thought, for us, obviously, there's a big, we could take this fully online. We could, Gabby was mentioning Fortnite, and that's for me, the part for me that I was like, well, there's no way we could make that leap into online, because these games like Fortnite are already doing it so well. We couldn't compete with that, but trying to blend it is probably what the areas that we'd be looking into the most.
It is quite an interesting thing, the kind of what makes the festival like your festival and not someone else's festival, not some other kind of event. And there is certainly some blurriness and some convergence there, I think. Hugh, where are you at in terms of this sort of potential and opportunity that's sort of emerging, and where you'd like to take things in the future?
Excuse me. I think that, we've got huge challenges ahead. We've got 30 years of doing live events and are doing a largely live event. And so doing something that's largely virtual is a huge, huge challenge. That said, there are some huge opportunities also. You referenced earlier, certainly for South by Southwest for 2021, the price point for attendees will be much, much, much smaller, lower than what we've offered before. So we think that opens us up to a new audience, and that new audience will help us grow in 2022 and beyond. It also opens us up to an even larger international audience. The international attendance at South by Southwest had been very strong before, but I think even more so for the online event in 2021. And we've certainly seen that with our early badge sales, that there's a large portion international. And again, just, when you eliminate the travel factor, the cost there, that changes everything. I think the third thing that's important to think about and to realize, and particularly with what we do at South by Southwest, one of our biggest pain points over the last decade and beyond has been rooms, venues, concert halls, theaters that were too crowded, that there was a line out the door, you couldn't get in. And we had devised a lot of technologies to help mitigate that problem, and had done a lot of great work there in terms of mitigating that problem, but there's still some of that problem. In an online world, that problem goes away largely. You have a session that 5,000 people want to get into. They couldn't get into a room. They couldn't all get into a room, but in an online world, they can all attend that. So that is really exciting also to change and completely eliminate that pain point that has been such a big such a big challenge for us in years past. And when I say challenge, it's when we're reading feedback post-event, that's always one of the biggest problems of, it was neat, but there were so many things I wanted to get to that I couldn't get into. So again, that's an opportunity for change and growth in 2021. And as we move to a hybrid event in 2022, we'll have lots of new ways to deal with these problems. So again, within the challenges here, there are also lots of things to look forward to.
And I think there's something interesting about sort of how you make those new experiences that are maybe, I think at the moment we've all been there's been a lot of Zoom going on, there's been lots of webinars going on, a lot of stuff that is not maybe the perfect online format, but people are open to experimentation, and people who've never been confident doing stuff online being up for trying stuff out. So there is a really interesting opportunity there in terms of bringing in those audiences.
Sure.
I was wondering, Gabby, the Manchester International Festival focuses on commissioning new work specifically, and I was wondering how much this weird transition period is influencing how you're going to commission the next things that are natively maybe digital only things that weren't already on your program list, Yeah.
I mean, we're at the moment going through different models of the festival and looking at the projects that are on the table, which ones can easily pivot to a digital experience or which ones can't. Because I think we all know, you can't just force a project in a particular direction if it doesn't make sense, and that's okay. I think there's a little bit of stepping back and going, it's not meant to go online, or it's not meant to be digital, and it's giving people the power to say that is okay. But we're really looking at what the different types of online engagement that might be. So, everyone here probably is aware of, I think, during lockdown, there was an increase in people who wanted more interactive from passive experiences. We certainly had it when we were just broadcasting things, but then towards the end, we were testing out dance classes and actually getting more response from that because people were wanting to do something. So I think, looking at some of the market research that's coming back about what kind of experiences particular audiences want and mapping those against our productions is a bit of work that we're doing. But we are trying to create a blended approach, and where possible, looking for efficiencies now. So at the beginning of that project, speaking to something that Hugh said, if it starts in one particular direction, how can that be broadcast, or how could that work into virtual realities? That kind of pipeline, thinking about that and where we might, what is the best model to build this production. But also I think, there's some really interesting I was in a meeting today about wanting to watch rehearsals, while they're in development because we've got a limit of the number of people in a room. And actually, most of that's going to be very boring. It's going to be like somebody stood there eating an apple for let's be honest, because this also what I might fear of missing out of processes that they would normally just be able to go and watch. So there's actually some really interesting developments internally in our own organisation about processes and things that we might want to see implemented around the making of work and how we share that around co-producers and co-commissioners. I think music, there's really big question marks for the industry at the moment because we don't know. A lot of the tours of those big artists are, going to be decided probably early next year. So we're trying to set up a model where we can move quite quickly with that, and also there's think about how we can create something really interesting and exciting that hasn't been done, but that comes down to also whether the artist really wants to experiment in that space.
I guess there's probably about a whole other 3 sessions on the kind of financial models of music and how that's having to change in response to this, because it's such a big change. I guess I'm really keen so in terms of that, what it feels like to be in a virtual event rather than a live event, and we're currently in one, so it's certainly going to focus the mind on it. I was just wondering where you see there as being a bit of a gap or something you'd love to be able to do. And I know we talked a little bit when we were kind of prepping for the panel. We talked a little bit about sort of technologies that might make all the difference to having a good hybrid experience or a good online experience. I know you started off by talking about stuff, actually some of the COVID safe technologies might make all the difference to running the live event possible. So we've seen lots of interesting immersive tech and things shown off today, but some of it might be much more practical than that. I don't know if you want to say a little bit about the sort of tech you'd like to be able to use and exploit to make a really good hybrid or in-person.
Yeah, well, within the context that certainly the next 12 months, 15 months are going to be similar to the last 6 months, where things are changing very, very rapidly. But I think for a lot of audiences, the success of in-person event is going to depend on what kind of assurances we can have that they will be safe. Is that on-site testing once and done? Is that testing every day? How can you do that and still facilitate large crowd inflow and egress, which is what we're all 3 of us are dealing with in terms of the kinds of events we're putting on. So that's gonna continue to change, be a moving target. I think we have some context at present, at least in the U.S., in terms of sporting events, which have to some degree experimented with, larger crowds and social distancing. Although you could also argue that the experiments so far have not been particularly positive in the U.S., given some of the challenges we've seen here. So again, one point of R&D to see is, and that we'll all want as event organizers, is just what can you offer on site that is quick, that assures our communities, our attendees, our audiences that they will enjoy what we have to offer, but also enjoy it safely.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of feeds into a kind of bigger thing about how you sort of lower some of the barriers to the technology and to accessing things in that space. Gabby, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, as Hugh was talking, the safety, health and safety is going to dominate so much of the conversations. We're here talking about innovation and models, but actually it's the first thing that we're talking about in every meeting. So, but I think for us, it's also, one of the things we've been thinking about a lot during this time is liveness and what live means, and actually what that means online. We have these definitions which are based from the 1930s, pretty much, where it's about distinguishing it from pre-recorded. And I do think one of the things that we certainly need to do is try and define what time means for an international audience and how we can play with that with productions and performances more. And I think that's something we haven't seen, but there is real opportunity there.
That sounds like a really interesting opportunity. I say we have a panel here that is joining us from 2 different time zones as well, so we're already in the... And
I would add to what Gabby said on the safety thing. I think it's important to realize and to understand and put in context that it's kind of a continuum of discussions we've been having for the last decade. And in the U.S., seeing the various nightclub shootings, the shootings in Las Vegas, increased concerns about weapons, about potential terrorism things. So those have been parts of our discussions, or big parts of our discussions at South by Southwest for the last several years. And certainly the COVID stuff is an extension of that. So it's not starting completely new, but it is a different extension, right?
And Maya, this must be kind of also part of your kind of planning about that experience being supposed. I have to say, when I looked at pictures of Boomtanks, I haven't been able to go myself. It's just like a wall of people, and I was looking at going, this looks amazing, and also in the current context, slightly terrifying. So it's must be the kind of tech that's also important for you as well.
Yeah, that's why I kind of said, we've got a huge contingency in place for hygiene and ventilation and all of these things, but an event such as ours, I don't know how we would translate that into a purely digital thing. So we are we've had to adapt this very fluid decision making. Another analogy we've come up with is this slippery frog, and every time we think we've got it, it jumps out and you've got to change everything again. And so, that's where we're at the minute. We're planning, and then, we are an adaptable bunch as well, so we just have to go with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, operationally it's pretty huge. But we've really looked at our site layout and changed that dramatically, actually, and really finessed it. Like, where it's been sprawling out, we've really finessed that to make it. I think it will be really, really good this year. Well, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I'm aware we have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to ask you what is one of the most interesting or challenging aspects of this whole kind of pivot to a more digital experience that we haven't talked about, that we will talk about in the Q&A in 2 minutes' time. So I'm going to ask Hugh first, and then I'm going to ask Maya, then I'm going to ask Gabby, and then we'll be pretty much at the end of our panel. So Hugh.
Okay, I'm going to cheat a little. I think the really fascinating stuff is what Gabby is talking about, and to some degree Maya, about the integrating with games and game technology and achieving new audiences that way. And it's certainly like one of the more interesting things that happened over the summer was Tomorrowland, which went all virtual, and they put a huge amount of effort into that. So I think that's something that is really fascinating. I'm not sure how much we can do of that at South by Southwest, but I applaud groups that can, and I think that's some really fertile ground.
Excellent. Maya.
Yeah, again, probably the most interesting thing would be what's interesting for us anyway is the gaming audience. Game mechanics is something we look at, and exploring the ARG element for us, using real world elements as well. That's an interesting option. But again, like this, what Hugh just said about Tomorrowland and going virtual, this a dream of a company with big budgets, not an independent show, multi-art show like ours. But that would be fab to try and make that work as well.
Okay, and Gabby.
Yeah, mine would be the quandary of access versus immersive, and how you can balance those two, and also how we build co-presence. How you create conversation with other people who are at virtual events. I think is critical. How you create that sense of belonging, authorship, and connect what is your local event with an international audience.
Great. Well, with that, I'm going to bring our panel to a close. But if you want to learn anything more about those three things you just heard about, or ask any questions of our panel, there's so many things we didn't get to, and there's so many things that I hope we'll raise in the chat as well in the Q&A session. So thank you for now. Huge thank you to our panelists, Maya, Gabby, and Hugh, and we will see you all over in the Hop-In Q&A if you care to join us in a few minutes' time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. And hello, lovely audience. Welcome to the Q&A session. Hurrah. I got some questions that I know have been raised during the main session there. I'm going to ask some of those, but also I'm going to start by picking up on those things we finished the session with. So I wanted to just talk a bit more about the game side of things, and then a bit about the kind of access and immersive side of things. And I'll start bringing in the questions from the main room and any questions people want to raise as we do that. So let's kick off with the kind of game side of things. And I think one of the questions that we have had in the chat is around what the closest is that we've been to creating or experiencing the liminality or intangible specialness that drives people to attend the festivals. And I feel like the game question and that question do go together a little bit. So I don't know who wants to kind of mull on that for a second and have a think about it. If you don't have questions, by the way, do just pop them in the chat. If you could at me, I'll see them that much more quickly. Maya, go ahead.
you just repeat that? Sorry, I missed it. Glitched out a little bit.
So picking up on the kind of games comment in the end of the session, but also a question raised there was, what is the closest you've all been to recreating or experiencing the liminality or intangible specialness that drives people to attend festivals? So that makes it special. And just, it seems like a question that doesn't automatically fit with games, but it seems like it's definitely there's an element of being embodied or present in a space together that seems like it's connected to both parts of that. So I'm going to let you mull for a second to say things only fair. You look like you might be poised and ready to go.
I'm poised to the extent that I will say I don't think we've hit on that magic formula yet. Certainly with the online stuff that we did last spring, what we found was pretty obvious that when we had speakers who were very, very engaged with their audience and pushed their audience to the South by Southwest platform, we had a lot more of an interesting session with lots more questions, with a lot more interaction than the speakers who weren't doing that much. We spent a lot of time and energy for the sessions we did online last spring with moderating the questions and trying to make sure that the questions, there wasn't anything inappropriate coming through. That was, when we were kind of at the height of Zoom bombing and whatnot. I think that's still a concern, but again, to lead off this discussion, I'll say that we haven't reached that promised land yet. We're still trying. Again, I like the gaming stuff that Gabby talks about. I think what does concern me about that, however, is that we know in live events, particularly of the scale that we're all talking about, people can easily get overwhelmed and lost. And I wonder how much even more of that happens in an online event. I mean, Gabby talked about making the game difficult and that engages a lot of the community. But what about the community that just is totally lost and, tunes out, turns off after 5 minutes, but they are completely lost? How do you hold the hands of those people? And that's a challenge we've had with in-person events, holding hands of people who need their hands held, and I think even more so in the online world.
Well, that's a really interesting question. I'm gonna come back to that in just a second. Interesting connection to games there. I did want to say though, Gabby, I know that you guys did some immersive, interactive theatre stuff in a very interesting kind of way. So I was looking up a review of the Party Skills for the End of the World event. Do you want to say a little bit about that and the ways in which that was made? I think very special by the sounds of it.
Yeah. So I think this was us actually having this very conversation around, immersive and accessible, and how you translate, I guess, very immersive, visceral production, which took place in 2017, and recreate that online. And the reason we wanted to do that was actually a gift to the audiences. It was actually trying to give them something on a Friday night where they could have fun, which is, it's a dark sense of humor, but Party Skills at the End of the World was the theme. At the time we worked a lot with Zoom as the parameter, like that was the framework, that was our stage, and tried to push where that was at that period of time. So doing a lot of in-video set design and playing with sound and just playing with the constraints of that space. I think, and that worked for that time, and worked because audiences are very forgiving of doing things quite quickly as a gift. But actually, moving forward, I think we've seen a lot more sophisticated evolutions of Zoom productions, to talk to that idea of like, where do you replicate the festival online? I don't think you can replicate a festival online. We shouldn't be trying to just purely replicate what we do in the physical world online. And I think that's the bit where, Hugh and Maya, we're all in that situation where we're like, we build something which is absolutely about, physical people in a space connecting. And we need to do something quite different when we translate that online, and actually, the in-game experiences of Fortnite can be quite alienating for a particular audience. And so I think it's also about, being smart about where we want to put energy and how people are consuming what kinds of content, and then how we present that, because access is just massive. It's just such a huge part, and actually a major audience, just wants to watch things on TV. And so, let's just be honest. So, we are seeing a real rise in like web TV, and actually, that's pushing a lot of festivals to become more like media companies. We were talking about this before, Hugh, weren't we? Where we're saying, actually, you just got to be more on top of your license agreements, your rights. And actually, that pushes us into a space which can be quite challenging for capacity reasons, because we're not set up to do that. So, yeah, a lot of us will have to move into actually more negotiations around rights so that we can experiment online, and that's going to take resource.
I'm going to pick that up in a second. We've got a couple of questions about finances that we'll definitely pick up. Maya, I know that in the way that Boomtown works, you have stuff that's very kind of intimate and one-to-one, and stuff that's then enormous. And there are learnings from how you kind of onboard and handhold through that kind of a space that you think applies in a sort of more somewhat digital, hybrid-y kind of experience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, our event is a sort of hybrid of its own, because, yeah, we move from a one-on-one experience that you could have with a character to these giant stage spectacle shows with digital and live elements, performers, music, screens. I think the rest is it's like it's about trying to keep the meaning, like getting the meaning to land in both of those. In some senses it's easier with a small interaction, but then on a bigger scale. But I think, yeah, how to translate that to digital, I don't know.
You were talking about what you said before. You were talking about how in the audience research, some of the audiences really enjoyed sitting in a waiting room, and they didn't realize it wasn't
thing. Part of what we do with our focus groups and all of that, and realizing that people like that quite lo-fi, off-the-wall kind of experience that you'll get at Boomtown, which is very much thanks to this collaborative approach that we have with smaller kind of underground collectives. That we work with everyone on an overarching narrative story for the year or theme, and they then come with their ideas, and we work together and they create things. And yeah, so somebody said that the best time they'd had at Boomtown was when they went into the waiting room and there was a line of chairs and they just sat there waiting, and we carried on waiting, and people got up and left, and then realised there was nothing happening. It was just a waiting room. So that was that. And there's a lot of those kind of experiences at Boomtown that's really off the wall. Like we had Cornucopia one year, there was lots of giant prawns, and just, yeah, I could go into thousands of them, but there's lots of that. But yeah, I don't know how you recreate that online. I mean, having these little breakout rooms, I don't know. We have been looking at it, but it's difficult. I mean, that's why we went quite lo-fi on our online event.
Yeah.
Just to keep that familiarity.
Yeah.
And we've got those same crews to sort of host hours and do it in our BTN feeling. Yeah, we kind of went that direction with it.
Yeah, the waiting thing does remind me of playing very frustrating video games in the kind of early 2000s, where you just sit there going, and what do I do now I found the book?
Yeah, not all of them are pointless like that. A lot of them have a clue to something deeper in the story, but those kind of things are fun.
Okay, I'm going to ask the money question, right? So there was a question from the audience about whether either of the two UK festivals had benefited from the 1.57 billion recovery money that was made available. So I will ask Gabby first and then Maya, but I think there's also another follow-on about kind of audience paying for things that I'm going to pick up with all three of you in a second. So yeah, Gabby, if you want to go first on the recovery funds there.
Yeah, my understanding from is that we didn't apply for any of the funding this time around, and we didn't also from any of the Innovate UK either. So yeah, but there's always the chance that there's somebody in my organisation that I don't know who has applied for something. But my understanding is we haven't. Yeah.
And how about you, Maya?
So I think largely due to a skeleton team and reduced capacity while we tried to survive this initially, we didn't actually apply for the CRF, which has been a bit of a shame because we think we may have been entitled to something, but I think something we're looking at for future, definitely, because we were pretty gutted when we realised we could have gone for it.
And I know another question about whether any of the festivals here being able to access any public or private funding for the festival to sort of help it to move forward and how helpful that was. I don't know if any of that's applied to South by Southwest at all here. Obviously, it's a different context. But.
Are you saying that we can apply for K? So
I'm pretty sure you
send me the form. Oh, yeah, okay.
I think sponsorship is
anything in terms of you've now to kind of get support in Austin from. Oh, he's gone. Right, well.
On that note, if you can't apply for funding, he's off.
There we go. I know he's having a few connection issues, so we'll come back to him in a minute. So one of the other questions that has been asked on the money front as well, and they do all the money questions at once, because obviously this does impact on the business models and the kind of future of the various festivals here. So one of the questions is how you can get audiences to actually pay for work that many of them might believe is, their right or their entitlement for free. So how are you dealing with that kind of challenge and ensuring that the artists you work with are actually paid for their work? So certainly when you're talking about kind of broadcasting existing work potentially, or sort of thinking about kind of more digital works, how's that looking in terms of people's engagement and willingness to pay?
Yes, I mean, we're just entering that now. I mean, we're somebody that hasn't been broadcasting for, in terms of MIS back catalogue, we don't have. Oh, hi, Hugh, he's back. We haven't had a model around that, so that's something we're beginning to enter into, thinking about how we contract our artists and also consider how we secure the license agreements for particular works moving forward. So we're beginning to embed that in terms of how we can get that financially supported. It's a very competitive market, and I think while there is a real interest in this space, I think, apart from a few sponsors, everyone is being hit right now in terms of our major sponsors for the festival, and we are looking at content partners, but I think we're also being very realistic about what we can achieve for July and actually putting in plans that are more long term. I think everything that we're putting in place is moving to more of an understanding of putting in agreements, as you would do if you were in a media production company, because you're going to have to use those assets moving forward in various ways and do that in a way so that the artists are also, recognised within that and paid for that work. I think it's a really big leap for audiences to pay for content online. And so we're going to be watching some people make that move before us, which is always a good way to learn. But I think, looking at various subscription models is something, we'll look to explore. And I think, there will be, I think one of the things we have learned is that there are some productions that have been working really well online. Dance and theatre, there is an audience for that. Certainly like with web TV and smart TV. So yeah, I think we're going to be looking at audience development strategies around that particular audience and shifting some of our business planning to focus on that.
I know one of the things that was tested out in the Edinburgh context this year is there's an organisation called Fringe of Colour. It's a little organisation that highlights particularly black minority ethnic productions and people involved in fringe productions. And they moved to doing a sort of Fringe of Colour TV festival, film festival online, where you had to pay like a $5 to access the content, but then you had kind of unlimited access to stuff that was removed after a week or 2 weeks. And that, I think that's quite an interesting kind of experiment in this kind of space. And you're right, there's people to watch and see how their experiments go first a bit to sort of see what's working. So that timeline of how long you keep things online is also a really interesting question. Maya, how are you thinking? So Maya and Hugh, you've both got reduced ticket prices next year. Is that because of it being virtual in part, or being potentially changed because there's a different model, or is it just in recognition of that we're all in kind of a really uncertain time. Maya, I come to you first and then to you maybe.
Yeah, that reduced ticket price was very much an awareness that the world has shifted for everybody in terms of price point, and also a reflection of us changing the model, because we will have to change. Well, we've reset in a lot of ways to grow again. So yeah, we just wanted to sort of roll back, and yeah, mainly an awareness that everybody else is affected financially, as much as we are.
And is that going to be okay for the kind of sustainability of the festival? Because obviously you'll presumably have fewer people on site as well.
There's robust financial modelling against it, and I think we felt more comfortable with that price point moving forward.
Okay. And Hugh, thank you for being so honest, by the way. It's a very very inappropriate questions in some ways, but they're really, really helpful for our audience, I think, as well. Hugh, how about you?
Well, the lower price point at our end, is a recognition that, for a largely online event, we're competing with, 10 billion YouTubers, which are all free. Now, yes, we can offer, and we will offer, robust networking. That is a differentiator, but again, it's a much different landscape than the in-person event. And just building a little bit off of what Gabby was talking about and where you started, one of the challenges of going to a largely online event is those reworking those rights agreements with speakers, with filmmakers, with bands. From our perspective, from what we do at South by Southwest, probably the most challenging there is with the filmmakers or the film studios. And in fact, some of those screenings for 2021 will likely be geofenced, where they're available to our audience in the US, but maybe not in the UK, because the film industry is still working off a world is round versus a world is flat model that maybe the rest of us have moved on from. So again, there are lots of challenges here. All the more so because this is just a different game plan of things that we're having to deal with in November versus November and December versus what we were dealing with in November and December for the last 15 years. So again, it's a whole new landscape.
Yeah, and I know there's certainly some types of creative work where if it's broadcast and recorded, it does somewhat change the nature of kind of what you can do with it. So I know that where comedy clubs have been doing gigs and charging or not for them, there's still a kind of time limit on how long they're available for, because there's an awareness that once it's otherwise out there, you can never use that material again. So it's very expensive material to produce. You can only use it once, which maybe doesn't apply with music, for instance, slightly different types of rights conversations. One of the questions we've had is about how you measure success or value for virtual festivals and events, and the things that you've been trying out or the things that you have planned, especially when compared to kind of the more traditional in real life events and your kind of pre-COVID kind of digital programming. So I was just wondering, what does success look like in those kind of spaces, and how you're able to kind of measure it? Because you're never going to get the same kind of sense of buzz that if you just wander around a physical festival, you can kind of tell how things are being received. So what's that been looking like for you, the stuff that you've been trying out or that you have planned? Like, have you got ideas about how you're going to do that? I'm going to do Hugh, whose internet connection looks very stable again for a second. And then let me get.
Well, the obvious measure of success is going to be, or obvious, the most obvious thing is, how many views did you get on a given video, and in some ways easier to measure that than what we've traditionally done face to face. But what I've always thought face to face was our measure of success is when you heard from your attendees that, I met someone here, I got a new job, I got a business partner, I got investment, I got inspired to go a different direction in my life, and measuring that online is going to be different. I also think that, reiterating what we've essentially said for the last hour, the whole experience is so much different of absorbing an online event. Whereas in person, if I'm traveling to Brighton or Manchester, you know, I'm there, and I've committed to that. I've made a physical journey, and I'm making somewhat of a metaphysical journey of being part of your event. For an online thing, that's completely different. I can turn it on for an hour. I can turn it off later. I don't know that any of us have the strongest brand in the world where people are going to absolutely devote 6, 8, 10 hours in a row to what we're offering online. So I think one of our challenges here, one of our many challenges here, is developing new models and new figures of what success looks like. Is it the NPS, Net Promoter Score? Is there something else? But again, it's a whole different landscape than what we've known for so long.
Yeah, and how about you, Gabby?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, and it's something that feels very real right now. I mean, we've been measuring our festival based on various objectives of our business, but also, you know, very much on the merit of those projects from a peer perspective, press perspective, audience sentiment, and tickets and KPIs that are about reach and engagement. But actually, I think all of, you know, I've been questioning for a while and pushing for something which allows us to look at how inventive and innovative we're being, and how you measure that. And I think because that for me is really important, because you reap the benefit of that thinking 5 years down the line or 3 years down the line, but it's not measurable to begin with. So so thinking a bit more about those longer term impacts that you might be able to start measuring from now on. So something that I've been thinking about a lot, thinking about also in relation to Johnny from Goldsmiths, who are working with on our Audiences of the Future project. So it feels very real. It feels like something we need to get in place. Otherwise, we're going to be measured just by reach online, and actually that's no measure for any kind of engagement, given that the algorithms are completely changing all the time.
It doesn't speak to how inclusive or accessible those events were either. I know Manchester puts all of its kind of demographic information on the webpage, which is brilliant because you can see the shift in proactive curation towards kind of more diverse faces and things. So
absolutely,
you never get a measure of that, just a reach.
Totally. And like we were doing events and 40 people would tune in, and it was not about the numbers. It was that those people got trained in how to deliver an event. They were participants in driving it, delivering it, and doing something that for their community. And in the same way you would do a stage show for 3 people, that is okay. And we need to find ways to measure the impacts of that alongside the big, 50,000 we've all tuned into New Order. So I think for us, it's about trying to find a way to measure it, which allows for those nuances.
And how about for Boomtown, Maya? I mean, I know you've got the community that's there all of the time. Does that give you different ways to measure success normally as well? Or have you already been trying stuff out in terms of your hybrid digital archetype engagements?
I mean, we just go off the standard, reviews and looking how many people are engaged and responses and just everything that's out there already. I mean, this is a big part of what we're always looking at, is how to measure that audience engagement and how to measure the sort of effectiveness of the message landing, I suppose. It's ongoing. I
mean, I know for all of your festivals, because they take place in a very particular locality, there's not just the sense of you being in that local space and engaging with the community there, but there's also the kind of impact on business around you. And I wonder to what extent the kind of economic success of your festivals we measure in a different kind of a way with the digital hybrid models and the impact on kind of local businesses in the areas you're in. So it's sort of something that was occurring, particularly looking at the kind of, obviously doing a bit of research on your festivals and sort of having a look at what the kind of economic impacts are at the moment. And a lot of those will be about impact on accommodation, on hospitality sector, on other kinds of businesses. So I was just wondering if you thought about any ways in which you might connect people up with some of those other parts of what makes it an Austin thing or a Manchester thing, or a kind of Hampshire/Bristol thing, if I'm right with them, to kind of to bring some of that localness into space in a different type of way. Is that something you've been thinking about at all?
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about a lot, but have not yet nailed a perfect strategy for this. And again, it's a challenge that is part of the scale challenge that we all have is, can you create some kind of tangible thing for your audience where they're getting a hat that says South by Southwest on it that they can wear while watching, that gives them some kind of real world physical connection to the event. Is it a drink or for the virtual happy hour? Again, that's a great idea. It's a phenomenal idea, but its scale of sending out, it's impossible or very hard, all the more so to get to our friends in get this stuff to our friends in the UK. How do you do that? But I think that, that having touch points like that is something that can move an event to an experience. And that's what we're all trying to do. I mean, creating an event is relatively easy. Creating an experience is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Maya, what about with you? Do you think that there have been ways that you're going to be doing other kinds of connecting up to those spaces? I guess you kind of hop into a space and make it your own, don't you? When you still set up Boomtown.
Yeah, I mean, we also terrible timing for us, but we also opened up our own event space in Bristol in November last year, which was an immersive theatrical music event space, and that was bringing a lot of what we do at the festival to Bristol and connecting the dots there. But yeah, in terms of how you connect with us online, I'll be honest, it's very difficult for us to do. I wouldn't,
Fair enough. I mean, I don't think any of these things are easy. It's part of the reason it's good to have an opportunity to talk through some of them. Gabby, how about you?
How about attraction? Well, if you go to the theatre, I have certain moments that I remember from an experience. So I don't think it should be considered kind of dirty to plan things that way. You want to hit the right notes with people. So that was always the starting point for us, was to have a table full of imagery that said, if you walk away with this and this and this, wouldn't that be fantastic? And that was how we started the whole thing. So a bit like storyboarding, but focusing on the kind of key moments rather than narrative.
Is that Andrew? Is that you?
I mentioned storyboarding. It's a way of taking us forwards into what you have developed.
What's happening?
So
I've got a stage just running in the background all this time. I was going, why are we getting heckled? Oh no, I'm so sorry. Mum just sharing there, just starting up on its own. Manchester.
Yeah. So
I'm so sorry, folks. Real life.
So similar to Hugh, we've been thinking about how do you create a sort of physical as well as a virtual conversation, so that blended experience, but a lot using props or different things that you could give them, merchandise, etc. Looking at networking tools that exist out there that would allow for a bit more of a bespoke build where you could represent some more of your city but internationally. So I've been looking at things like High Fidelity, which are mainly audio driven, but allow you to sort of map locations. But also thinking a lot about sport, because Manchester, the city of football, has these moments in pubs where they sit around screens, they watch football, and they go mad, and they feel super engaged and excited. And we're like, how do you create some of that for culture and what we're doing with the festival, but in different places around the world? How can you get that enthusiasm and spill it, to different partners with different festivals, and thinking also about how we can support festivals and festivals can work together to bring infrastructure and collaboration. And so South by Southwest party in Manchester, great, we can all watch it together. That kind of thing I think is some of the thinking that's really important now in the next stages as we start figuring out whether we can travel or not.
TED had experimented some with that even before the pandemic, where they were doing TED watch parties in various cities, and I think there's a lot to that. but how can you? I mean, the devil's going to be in the details in terms of not only having a watch party, but having something that's tangible, that having a person there that can greet people, that can give them a sense of place and belonging. So again, there are lots of incredible ideas out there, but just a whole different skill set in terms of executing.
Yeah, thanks. Experiencing again. I've been to one of the TEDx watch parties some years ago. It was a TEDx one and a TED one, and it was relatively well curated, but it wasn't. It was very much not the same experience. It is a really tricky thing to curate. We've had a question in the chat that's quite interesting. One is someone asking that they've seen some VR festivals and talking about Lost Horizon in particular, and they're wondering if there's scope for a mini breakout gatherings kind of globally for festivals moving forward. So I don't know, some kind of large scale, I don't know, guest slots from different festivals kind of thing. Is that a thing that you're considering or have been aware about, or is that a thing that you would like to be able to do? Like, there's this very strange tension between what is a kind of global experience or is presented the same way for different kinds of audiences, and what is that local, your festival's brand, your festival's personality kind of vibe. And that seems to be kind of, an opportunity to kind of really model that in an interesting way. What do you think, Maya? You look kind of vaguely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know the Lost Horizon team quite well, and I've spoken to them about this, opportunities like that. I mean, they are, fantastic that they could get that off the ground and do it. I think the interesting thing about creating the VR festival is we've immediately got a barrier of entry because we need the headset and the kit.
Yeah.
And like we did it, we went to a friend's house and we had a kit, but we only had one set, so it kind of immediately pulled you out of. It was like a group setting, but only one of you could actually go in, and so there's all these sort of things, but there's ways around that of having spaces with lots of headsets and things. But I'd really that would work for us to do a space like that. We could create something smaller within an infrastructure like that. We, as an independent festival, that survival is key. We haven't got the kind of backup funds to create something like that ourselves, but that would be something really interesting for us to do, like some little rooms in that setting. That would be great.
Yeah. Gabby?
No, I think definitely there are ways that festivals could group together and create spaces. I mean, in some senses, I feel a bit like our audiences of the future is that. There's ourselves, RSC, Punch Drunk, London Philharmonia, and where the experience we're creating is very much thinking about that world. What I don't like within those spaces is how fixed they can look. I think there's a sort of similar aesthetic that they tend to have, and whether you can translate that difference of the festival's content is something, it's a challenge, but it's an opportunity as well. And I think we're seeing it in more lo-fi ways as well. You're seeing festivals, there's all the film festivals grouped together to do one big festival, Cannes, Berlin, London. And they showcase a lot of short films and I think and other features, and there's something I think certainly with performance and theatre festivals that are looking at that at the moment. So I think there are definitely ways in which you can share resources and it works. It works for the sector because we're not all having to manage that risk.
Yeah. And how about you, Hugh? Obviously, South by Southwest, there's often a lot of technology being showcased there, so you must see some of this stuff getting demoed. So I don't know, how do you feel about joining a kind of bigger VR, showcase for all of the festivals?
Trade shows are always the place where VR is the most popular. And unfortunately, has yet to extend to the mainstream. I mean, to what Maya said, the barrier for adoption is that still a very small portion of your audience has the headsets, and until the prices come down more, until there's more positive reviews of content, of experience, that's not going to change. So I think we're still a few years away from something like that, where we can really offer something at scale on a VR type platform. We were able to put out some of our VR content through a promotion with Oculus this past May. So that was pretty neat. But again, it's to a very small audience. And, you know, I'm a fan of VR, XR, AR, but this technology has been hyped for 20 years and not yet kind of reached our tipping point on this. Maybe the straw that finally puts us over the tipping point, but it hasn't happened yet. And I would be a little bit loath to putting too many eggs in that basket.
And that speaks to Gabby's point about kind of inclusion and access before as well. Yeah. So we're almost at the end of our time again. The question I wanted to kind of end on is just, we had a question about whether with the return to physical events, there's a sense of what digital online aspect you'd like to keep alongside those physical events going forward. And that seems like a lovely place to leave things. So I'm going to start with Maya, who I know is already doing stuff in the hybrid world anyway, and then kind of carrying around the room as our way of kind of bringing this to a close. So Maya.
Yeah, I mean, we will continue to do what we do. I think we'll be looking at everything again. We kind of put that on hold for a little bit just to focus on the actual event, and then we are just really getting into digging into the creative side of how to bring all. So like previously, where we've had our campaigns and our themes or stories, like the environment has been big for the last 3 years. You know, they've been together, but they've kind of slightly felt separate. So that we're really looking at bringing it all back together, and then how we then will launch that.
Great.
Watch this space.
I will. Gabby.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that we'd like to carry through, I think having the same attention to the online events, so we do the equal attention to online and physical in terms of the rituals, the pre and post experiences, pre and post, you know, buying the ticket, what does that mean? Post experience, how you follow up with your audiences. I think when we've done things online before, it's been quite transactional. So that sense of attention that you would probably give to somebody if they came to your box office, you would still give to them online in some capacity. So I think internally it's some work that we need to do on that. And, you know, I think also just giving audiences the agency that we don't actually give to our online audiences in the same way I think we do when we do a sort of immersive performance in real life as well. So we'll definitely carry that through in terms of how we plan productions next year.
Excellent. And Hugh.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, knock on wood, that we are fully vaccinated by 2022, and we'll be back to real world experiences, but we'll have a full hybrid event then, with some portion online and again a lot in real. That again we'll have more skills to move and embrace new business models, and Gabby touched on this a little bit earlier in terms of that blurring between event companies and media companies going ever closer in the future, and all of us moving from a 10-day event in March to a 365-day event, where we're offering content year-round, offering new content year-round, offering, maybe it's no longer that we're selling a ticket model. So of new things to embrace, but bottom line here is that I think there will be tremendous pent-up demand in late 2021, 2022 for real world events. So that's heartening, but certainly we've got several more months of winter before we get there, right?
Yeah, we do. That's a very optimistic and good place to be leaving things on, I think. I certainly am desperate to be back in the midst of all the festivals. So thank you so much to fantastic panel. Thank you so much, all three of you, for taking so much time and for your honesty. I know that was certainly commented in the chat. We're particularly appreciative of that. And yeah, thank you so much. I hope all goes well with the 2021 iterations of your festivals. I will certainly be looking out for all the stuff, whether I can be there in person or hopefully digitally as well. Yeah, it'd be fantastic to see what happens next. Thank you so much, and thank you for the fantastic questions from our audience here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You still see a few comments coming on the chat. Oh, and everyone wants to come back to the festivals.
So that's nice.
Yeah, it was slightly sad, but slightly lovely to kind of be looking at all of the previous iterations of your various festivals and sort of thinking about things that I would really like to have seen or would like to see next. So
Yeah.
yes, there we go. So Sam has helpfully pointed out that we don't finish, we just have to go. So thank you. It's been so lovely to do this with you.
Lovely to chat.
You all. Good
Yeah.
luck with your May project.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Good luck all.
Bye.
Bye.